Winter, 1944. The plains of Oklahoma lie under a curtain of ice and wind. Inside a wooden barrack surrounded by barbed wire, hundreds of German prisoners huddle beneath army blankets too thin for the cold. They were soldiers once, men of the Africa Corps, captured at Tunis and shipped across the ocean to a country they had been told was starving. For days, they have eaten little on the transport trains: canned beans, stale bread, and the taste of fear. Some whisper that America will make them dig their own graves. Others, quieter, have already accepted that they will die behind fences on foreign soil. Then, as night thickens and the guards make their rounds, a strange scent drifts through the camp. At first, they think it's a hallucination. It smells like roasted meat. The wind shifts, carrying smoke from the direction of the mess hall. A guard opens the door and warmth spills out, along with laughter and the unmistakable hiss of fat meeting fire. The prisoners rise to their feet, blinking. One mutters that it must be a trap. Another swears he smells beef. When the guards wheel out the food trays, silence follows. Stainless steel containers filled with slices of grilled steak, mashed potatoes, loaves of soft bread, and mugs of steaming coffee. For a moment, the prisoners stand frozen, as if the vision might vanish. The officer in charge, Lieutenant Raymond Carter, calls out the order in a calm, firm tone. "Mess line open, everyone eats." His voice carries no triumph, no mockery, only procedure. A young German corporal named Ernst Hagen, 23 years old, watches with disbelief. His last memory of abundance was in 1941, before the Eastern Front swallowed half his regiment. Now, under the shadow of defeat, he sees his captors setting down food with care, no gloating, no sneers. Just methodical service, like one would for their own men. He steps forward, takes a metal plate, and accepts a portion of beef that glistens with its own juices. His hands tremble. The aroma of salt and smoke fills his lungs, and for the first time since capture, his body remembers hunger as something human, not humiliating. The first bite is unbearable in its simplicity, warm, seasoned, real. His throat closes, eyes burn. He turns to the man beside him and whispers, "If this is the enemy, then their mercy is stronger than our armies." Across the hall, an American private looks on, expression unreadable. He doesn't know the words, but he recognizes the sound of gratitude breaking through pride. The men eat slowly, almost reverently, afraid to finish. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, coating the barbed wire with a thin, fragile beauty. The camera lingers on the smoke curling from the chimney, rising into the indifferent sky. Beneath it, men who had been taught to hate now eat from the same fire as those who captured them. Not through speeches, not through victory parades, but through the smell of roast meat drifting across a frozen camp. The first quiet miracle of captivity. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Morning arrives pale and cold over the Oklahoma camp. The smell of last night's roast still lingers faintly in the air. The Germans awaken expecting it to have been a dream, a brief trick of mercy before punishment. But as the guards call them to assembly, they are handed breakfast trays of eggs, milk, butter, and bread. It feels impossible. Men who only weeks ago were living on cabbage soup under British custody now chew toast spread with real cream butter. They exchange wary glances, waiting for the deception to reveal itself. In the administrative office, a Red Cross inspector stands beside Lieutenant Carter, reading from a printed document. The Geneva Convention of 1929, Article 11. It states that prisoners of war must receive rations equal in quality to those of the detaining power's own troops. Carter has followed that rule to the letter. For the Americans, it isn't generosity, it's duty, law, discipline, and a belief that even war has boundaries. But to the prisoners, it feels like stepping into another civilization. One sergeant named Friedrich Blum records in his notebook, "They give us milk every day, real milk. In Russia, our men drank melted snow." He doesn't share this line with anyone. Even to write it feels like treason against everything he was taught. The Nazis had shown him propaganda reels of America's breadlines, of gaunt faces during the Depression. Yet here, amid the war, the kitchens smell of yeast and cinnamon. American soldiers drink coffee with sugar every morning. Even the camp dogs look well fed. At noon, the prisoners are given stew made from vegetables and beef. Someone jokes bitterly that perhaps they have been captured by illusionists. Another murmurs, if this is how they treat enemies, what must they give their friends? Laughter spreads, uneasy but real. The walls of propaganda begin to crack, not through argument, but through nourishment. Carter watches from a distance. He has read their profiles. Men from Bremen, Stuttgart, Dresden. Some were engineers, teachers, or farmers before the war. He knows the rule, treat them humanely, no matter what they've done. But part of him also feels something deeper. Feeding the defeated, he realizes, is a kind of victory that needs no medals. When the day ends, a few prisoners remain outside, staring at the stars. Friedrich breaks the silence. We starved others, and now we eat. What does that make us? No one answers. The question hangs in the cold, carried by the same wind that once brought the smell of meat. That night, a telegram arrives from Washington, reminding camp commanders that America's moral strength is measured not only by what it destroys, but what it sustains. The soldiers in Oklahoma do not need the reminder. They have already witnessed the quiet shock of civilization, a war fought not with hunger, but with decency. In his diary, Friedrich writes one more line before sleep. We have not only lost the war, we have lost the argument about who is civilized. The lamps go out one by one, and the camp falls into stillness. The only sound is the faint hum of the generator, and, far away, the whistle of a freight train carrying wheat, food for soldiers, civilians, and even prisoners. The war, for all its cruelty, cannot silence the hum of abundance. Noon, sunlight washes across the campyard, bright and sharp on the tin roofs. It is 1944, and the prisoners have begun to understand that the Americans are not starving, not desperate, not what the radio back home described. Yet every day still holds surprises that challenge everything they once believed. On a Thursday, the noon bell rings for lunch. The men line up, plates in hand, ready for their routine meal. But today, a ripple of confusion moves through the crowd. A group of American officers enters the mess hall, not for inspection, they have done that countless times, but to eat. One captain removes his gloves, walks straight to the serving line, and without ceremony, takes a ladle from a German cook. He scoops stew from the same pot and fills his own tray. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Forks hover, conversations freeze. The captain sits down at one of the long wooden tables, the kind usually reserved for the prisoners. He nods to the man across from him, a mechanic from Hamburg named Otto Klein, and begins to eat. The silence stretches, then breaks into soft murmurs. Otto stares at the officer, uncertain whether to follow or stand in respect. Finally, the captain gestures slightly, a small motion that says, "Sit, eat." Otto lowers himself onto the bench, the wood creaking under his weight, and the entire room exhales at once. To the prisoners, it feels like the universe has tilted. Sharing a table, a pot, a meal, it was something unthinkable between enemies. In Germany, they had been told Americans were crude materialists, obsessed with machines and money. But here sits an American officer eating from the same ladle as a German prisoner, his expression ordinary, his posture relaxed. Later, in the barracks, the conversation turns restless. One soldier mutters that the gesture was psychological warfare, a tactic to break them. Another shakes his head, saying no speech could do what that single act did. Otto writes a single line in his small black diary that night. They have won more than the war. They have won our respect without asking for it. Lieutenant Carter hears about the incident and says nothing, but in his report he notes, camp morale improved, contact between guards and prisoners more cooperative. He doesn't write what he truly thought, that the table had become more powerful than the rifle. Weeks later, the tradition quietly continues. Occasionally, a guard sits among them during meals. Sometimes he jokes, sometimes he says nothing at all. But the meaning is the same. Food shared across the boundaries of war is a language no one needs to translate. Outside, the Oklahoma wind blows dust across the compound, carrying the faint sounds of the town nearby. Children playing, a radio humming big band music, the smell of corn and diesel drifting through. For the prisoners, those distant noises are reminders of the world beyond the fence. But inside, around those rough wooden tables, they are beginning to sense something even more bewildering. that the enemy is teaching them how to be human again. And so, as the sun sets over the plains, light spills across the mess hall, glinting off tin cups and empty plates. It lands briefly on Otto's diary, still open to one unfinished line. They fed us as men, not enemies, and that is harder to forget than any victory. Spring, 1945. The war in Europe is collapsing, but inside the Oklahoma camp, time seems suspended. The wheat fields beyond the fence turn gold under the sun, and the prisoners have grown used to routines of quiet labor, reading, and mealtime bells. Yet, one afternoon, the sound of a truck engine interrupts their rhythm. The vehicle stops outside the gate, and from its bed, guards unload crates of bread. Not the coarse army loaves the prisoners expect, but round golden ones wrapped in paper. The commandant calls the men together and explains that the bread comes from a small town nearby, from citizens who wanted to send something for the men far from home. A murmur passes through the ranks, skeptical at first, but then someone reads the note tied to one of the baskets. It is written in a woman's careful handwriting. "My son died in France. I don't want another mother's son to go hungry, even an enemy's." The signature reads Clara Bennett, Tulsa County. For a long moment, no one moves. The prisoners exchange glances, unsure what to do with such mercy. One of them, a middle-aged corporal named Hans Meyer, steps forward and touches a loaf as if it might vanish. He breaks it open. The crust crackles, releasing the smell of yeast and butter. Warmth escapes, as though it carries the breath of the woman who baked it. Hans had served as an artillery gunner. Somewhere in northern France, his battery might have shelled the very town where Clara Bennett's son had died. He takes a piece, closes his eyes, and his lips tremble. "She lost a son because of us," he whispers. "And still, she bakes for us." He cannot finish the bread. He folds it in cloth and keeps it beside his bunk for days, as if it were a relic. That evening, the camp is silent. Even the guards speak in low tones. The Red Cross representative, noting the delivery, writes, "Civilians continue to send food despite personal losses. Morale among POWs deeply affected." He doesn't describe how one prisoner pressed his face into his hands and cried for the first time since surrender. Word spreads quickly through the camp. Some men feel gratitude, others feel shame, but all of them sense something shifting, a collapse of the invisible wall that had protected their pride. The propaganda that once painted Americans as soulless machines now feels absurd. The idea of a grieving mother kneading dough, her kitchen smelling of flour and grief, breaks through every barrier of ideology. Days later, a group of prisoners writes a letter of thanks, though none are sure it will ever reach her. They use the only English words they know. "Thank you, Mother." It is signed by 42 men. As night falls, the camera drifts over the quiet camp. The ovens still glow faintly, and from inside, the barracks comes the soft sound of a man praying in German, his voice fragile but steady. Beyond the fence, the Oklahoma sky burns orange before fading to black. Somewhere out there, a woman mourns her son and feeds those who might have killed him. In that paradox lies the deepest truth of the war, that mercy, once given freely, makes the conqueror and the captive equal for a heartbeat, sharing not victory or defeat, but the same fragile humanity. By mid-1945, the war in Europe is over. In the Oklahoma camp, the prisoners know it from the sudden change in tone among the guards, relief without celebration, fatigue without cruelty. Victory has come, yet life goes on behind the fences. The prisoners still wake at dawn, stand for roll call, and eat 3 meals a day. But something inside them has begun to ache in ways hunger never did. Each noon, the kitchen door swings open to reveal steaming trays of stew and loaves of bread. The same bread that once felt like salvation now feels like judgment. For Sergeant Friedrich Blum, the one who once wrote about milk and melted snow, each bite reminds him of the prisoners his own army starved on the Eastern Front. He cannot separate nourishment from memory. In his diary, he writes, "Every meal is an accusation. He is not alone." Around the tables, conversations grow quieter. The men eat, but their eyes drift away. The American cooks, friendly and professional, notice the change, but say nothing. The food remains plentiful: coffee, potatoes, meat, vegetables. Yet the appetite fades. Some men begin giving part of their ration to birds outside the fence, as if trying to balance an invisible scale. One afternoon, the camp chaplain, Father Andrew Keegan, visits the mess hall. He had served in Italy and speaks a few words of German. Looking around the room of silent men, he asks softly, "Is it too much?" No one answers. Then a voice from the corner says in broken English, "Too kind, Father, too kind for what we did." The priest nods and replies, "Then let kindness be your teacher." The scene that follows feels suspended in air. An American chaplain standing among defeated soldiers who cannot forgive themselves for being fed. There is no sermon, no prayer, only the scrape of spoons on tin. That night, Friedrich dreams of a Russian prisoner he once guarded, a boy who traded a watch for a piece of bread. He wakes sweating, goes to the washroom, and stares into the mirror. His reflection looks older than his years. He touches his face as though trying to wash away guilt, but the water does nothing. Days later, he helps unload supplies with the American cooks. One of them, a corporal named Miller, laughs as he carries a sack of flour. "You guys eat better than we do," he jokes. Friedrich manages a faint smile, but says quietly, "You feed us because you believe in something bigger than us." Miller shrugs, wiping his hands. "We feed you because you're hungry. That's all." It's a simple line, but it breaks something open. Friedrich realizes that morality doesn't need to shout. It can whisper through a ladle, through a loaf, through an act repeated 3 times a day until it becomes undeniable. To everyone watching now, imagine yourself in his place. If the people you had dehumanized offered you food without resentment, would you eat in peace? Or would every swallow taste like shame? Tell me what you think in the comments, because this is not just history. It's the anatomy of conscience. That night, the camp is quiet again. 1,000 men sleep under a sky full of indifferent stars. Somewhere in the dark, a loaf of bread cools on a metal rack, still warm enough to remind them they are alive and guilty. By autumn 1945, shipments of food begin to arrive slower. The war in the Pacific is ending, rations are tightening, and even American towns feel the pinch of supply cuts. Inside the Oklahoma camp, rumors spread that the next week's meat delivery might not come. The prisoners brace themselves for hunger at last. Perhaps, they think, justice has caught up. But when the midday bell rings, the scent of roasted meat still drifts through the camp. The guards serve thinner portions, yet every plate has its share. It isn't until a week later that the truth quietly surfaces. During a maintenance shift, Otto Klein overhears 2 guards talking near the kitchen. One of them, Corporal Miller, says, "We cut our own servings last week, just so the rations would stretch." The other replies, "They've eaten worse than we ever will. Let them have the meat." Otto freezes. He doesn't interrupt, just stands in the doorway watching them scrape the bottom of the pot, their sleeves rolled up, sweat shining on their forearms. Later, in the barracks, he tells Friedrich Blum and Hans Meyer what he heard. They fall silent. Friedrich looks down at his hands and whispers, "They didn't just feed us. They fed us from their own mouths." The realization ripples through the camp like an unspoken prayer. Men who once measured strength by conquest now see another kind of courage: restraint, sacrifice, quiet humanity. The Americans had no reason to do it. No one would have known if they hadn't. And yet, they shared what little they had. A week later, during Sunday roll call, the commandant reads a short message from Washington thanking guards for maintaining Geneva standards despite shortages. The men don't cheer. They stand in still silence, as if the words themselves weigh too much. That evening, Otto writes a letter he will never send. "To my wife, Elsa," it begins. "They told us America was greedy, but I have seen men give away their dinner so that strangers, even enemies, would not go hungry. We were wrong about them, and maybe about ourselves." The following morning, a Red Cross truck arrives with new supplies. The crisis is over, but the memory remains sharper than hunger. The prisoners eat quietly, not because they are tired, but because gratitude has replaced appetite. If you were there, if your enemy went hungry beside you, would you share your meal? Would you give up your comfort for someone who once aimed a rifle at you? Leave your answer in the comments, because this question, born in a war long gone, still decides who we really are. The camera lingers on the camp as twilight falls. The fence casts long shadows over the field. On one side, American soldiers finish their shifts and light cigarettes. On the other, German prisoners gather around their tables, passing bread without words. For a moment, the fence doesn't matter. They had been told America was starving, and yet, in the weeks of scarcity, they discovered the opposite. A nation that could feed others even when it was hungry itself. Winter, 1946. The war is over, the camps are closing. Wooden barracks stand half empty, and trains wait to carry men back across the ocean to a Germany they no longer recognize. In the Oklahoma dawn, the last prisoners rise for one final breakfast. Steam curls from the mess hall chimney. The smell of bread, warm, sweet, unmistakably fresh, fills the air like a memory refusing to fade. Inside, American cooks move quietly. There are no speeches, no farewells, just rhythm. Knives slicing ham, coffee percolating, ovens opening with soft sighs. On each table, they place a simple plate, scrambled eggs, 2 slices of bread, and a small square of butter. It is the same meal the guards will eat. For the prisoners, it feels like the last page of a book they never expected to live through. Hans Meyer sits near the window. He fingers a folded letter from months earlier, the one signed, "Thank you, Mother." He has read it so many times that the ink has begun to fade. Now, as he tears a piece of bread and chews slowly, he feels an ache that isn't hunger. Across the room, Friedrich Blum watches the guards. One offers a cigarette to an old sergeant who hesitates, then accepts. The match flares between them, brief and golden. When the trucks arrive to take them to the rail station, the men line up in silence. Some clutch photographs, others small carvings made from scrap wood. Otto Klein carries nothing except a crust of bread wrapped in paper. As he steps onto the truck, he presses it into his coat pocket. Later, when customs officers in Bremerhaven will ask why he kept it, he will answer, "Because it was warm." Before departure, Lieutenant Carter addresses them one last time. "You are free men now," he says simply. "Go home and build something better." No applause, no salutes, just the sound of the wind sweeping across the empty yard. The convoy moves out, engines rumbling, leaving behind a camp that smells faintly of yeast and smoke. The camera lingers on the mess hall door swinging open, revealing empty tables and the last crumbs of bread. Outside, the snow begins to fall, erasing footprints one by one. Years later, in 1947, one former prisoner returns. It is Hans. He finds the old camp abandoned, the fences rusted, the oven bricks crumbling. He stands before the cold hearth, lays a hand on the wall, and whispers, "I owe them not my life, but my faith in life." For a moment, he thinks he can still smell bread in the air. The camera closes in on his hand resting on the cracked bricks, a symbol of everything fragile yet enduring. In that silence, the story finds its end. From hunger to fullness, from pride to humility, from hatred to gratitude. The men who once feared starvation learned that generosity can conquer more than armies. It can rebuild the soul. History often records victory in tonnage and treaties, but true conquest lies in the quiet moments no ledger counts. A shared loaf, a cup of coffee, a choice to feed instead of punish. Those German prisoners discovered a power greater than ideology, the decency of ordinary people who refused to let war dictate their humanity. When they went home, they carried no banners, only memories, of warmth, of fairness, of an unexpected gentleness that defied everything they had been taught. Some became teachers, some farmers, a few even worked for humanitarian organizations, trying in small ways to return what they had received. They spoke not of politics, but of bread. Decades later, one former POW told his grandson, "I learned democracy at the dining table. It was not through propaganda, but through flavor, through the simple miracle of being fed by one's enemy and realizing the enemy was human." And that is the lingering truth, that civilization is proven not when we destroy evil, but when we feed it and make it harmless. The ovens have long gone cold, yet the lesson stays warm, that mercy can survive even the most brutal war, one meal at a time.